These are 9 men who abused children, got caught, and then sat in a courtroom while a judge decided what the rest of their life looked like. Some got decades, some got centuries, and a few of them never even made it to their first parole hearing. 1. Terry McFadden. On April 7, 2019, Franklin County Children's Services in Ohio sent a referral to Grandview Heights Police about possible inappropriate contact involving children at a residential daycare. The daycare was run out of a home on Gladden Avenue by a man named Terry McFadden and his wife Carol. Police moved fast. Before an arrest was even made, additional children were pulled from the residence as a precaution. The fact that law enforcement removed other kids before charges were filed tells you how quickly it became clear that something was seriously wrong inside that house. The 2 victims were sisters, 4 and 6 years old. Their parents had trusted McFadden with their care during the day, the way any parent using a home daycare would. When detectives brought McFadden in for questioning the following day, April 8th, he did not deny what he had done. He admitted to the abuse in that interview. Court records describe the abuse as involving repeated sexual contact with both girls. McFadden was 70 years old at the time of his arrest. He eventually pleaded guilty to 2 counts of rape on January 9, 2020, in Franklin County Common Pleas Court. Sentencing was set for March 3rd. In court that day, the victims' parents addressed the room. Their statement described the moment their daughters came to them, how they listened, believed them, and acted immediately. They urged every other parent to do the same. The father then addressed McFadden directly, telling him he was no parent, no warrior, no citizen, and that he was not welcome back into humanity ever again. McFadden told the court he accepted full responsibility and had no excuse. Judge Julie M. Lynch did not soften her words. She said the court was sick and tired of seeing adults destroy children, that parents trust caregivers to keep their kids safe, and that McFadden could not begin to know the damage he caused 2 little girls, she described as 1 step away from being babies. She sentenced him to 11 years on each count, served consecutively for a total of 22 to 27.5 years in prison. He was classified as a Tier 3 sex offender for life, so if he ever gets out, he has to report to the county sheriff every 90 days for the rest of his life. He is not eligible for early release. He was 70 years old when he went in. The next case out of Jackson, Michigan, is something else entirely, because the person who gave a predator access to those kids was supposed to be protecting them. 2. James Tingley. James Tingley had been abusing children for a long time before anyone ever charged him. By the time he sat in a Jackson County courtroom in April of 2015, prosecutors said the abuse stretched back 40 to 50 years and touched the lives of at least 7 girls. But the case that finally put him in front of a judge centered on 2 young girls from right next door, and the way they ended up in his hands is what makes this one particularly hard to sit with. Tingley's neighbor was a man named Randy Stevens, 45 years old, father of 14 children. Stevens was not an uninvolved bystander. Prosecutors said Stevens was the one sending his daughters to Tingley's home, collecting drugs, money, and food in exchange for the access he provided, and then sending the girls back again. The assistant prosecutor described him in court as the one controlling who came and went, accepting the payment, and making the whole thing possible. The abuse of the 2 girls at the center of the case continued for at least 6 years. It came to light when the girls were placed with foster parents and told them what had been happening. Tingley and Stevens were charged separately and tried before separate juries. Tingley was convicted on 8 counts of criminal sexual conduct in March of 2015. Stevens was convicted on 8 counts as well, including counts for directly abusing one of his own daughters and for enabling what Tingley did. Tingley said nothing at sentencing. Jackson County Chief Circuit Judge Thomas Wilson did not hold back. He told Tingley that he had been abusing children for 40 to 50 years, that at least 5 other victims were known beyond the 2 in this case, and that the children he hurt would carry what happened to them for the rest of their lives. He then said plainly that many people probably thought the only money worth spending on Tingley was the cost of a bullet, but that keeping him locked away was worth every penny. 2 sentences, 2 men, and a pattern of abuse that stretched across decades. But the next case takes the concept of maximum punishment to a completely different scale. 3. John Acklin. In 2017, New York State Police opened an investigation into reports of child sexual abuse that had taken place more than a decade earlier in the town of Livingston, Columbia County. The man they were looking for, John Acklin, was long gone. He had left Livingston years earlier and relocated to Bandera, Texas. Investigators noted that the abuse had stopped when he moved away, which told them exactly what kind of case this was. Working with the Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Rangers in Bandera County, investigators tracked him down and had him arrested as a fugitive from justice on October 25, 2018. He was 55 years old. He was extradited back to New York on November 8th and remanded to Columbia County Jail without bail. The indictment that followed laid out the full scope of what prosecutors alleged. 11 counts of predatory sexual assault against a child, 1 count, of course, of sexual conduct against a child in the first degree, 10 counts of criminal sexual act in the first degree, and 10 counts of aggravated sexual abuse in the second degree. The 2 victims had been under 11 years old at the time the abuse occurred, between December 2004 and March 2006. Trial began August 5, 2019 in Columbia County Court before Judge Jonathan D. Nichols. The survivors, now adults, took the stand and testified about what had been done to them as children. On August 9th, after deliberating for 90 minutes, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all 16 counts. Several additional counts had been dismissed because the statute of limitations had expired, but 16 remained, and the jury convicted on every single one. On October 4th, 2019, Judge Nichols sentenced Acklin to the maximum on each of the 16 counts for a combined total of 335 years in the New York State Department of Corrections. The Texas Rangers who worked the case traveled to Hudson, New York twice to testify, and Charka recognized them by name at sentencing. Acklin was 56 years old when the sentence came down. 335 years, maximum on all 16, for a man who thought leaving the state was the same thing as getting away with it. And just like him, this next guy thought he got away with his crimes against children. 4. Larry Nassar. For over 2 decades, Larry Nassar operated with near-total impunity. He was the national team physician for USA Gymnastics and a sports medicine doctor at Michigan State University, which meant he had access to some of the most accomplished young athletes in the country. Girls came to him with injuries, and he used every bit of that trust to sexually assault them over and over while telling them it was medical treatment. The abuse stretched back to at least the early 90s and went on until he was finally arrested in 2016 by Michigan State University police, following an 8-month investigation by the Indianapolis Star. A former gymnast named Rachel Denhollander had filed a police report, and that report set everything in motion. By the time the full scope came into view, at least 265 women and girls had come forward, with the confirmed number later surpassing 500 through civil litigation. His victims included multiple Olympic gold medalists. When the FBI searched his devices, they found over 37,000 images and videos of child pornography. The sentencing proceedings were unlike almost anything seen in an American courtroom before. In Ingham County alone, 156 women delivered impact statements over 7 days, many of them describing how they had reported what Nassar was doing and been dismissed, or told they didn't understand the difference between medical treatment and assault. Ingham County Judge Rosemary Aquilina sentenced him to 40 to 175 years in state prison. Eaton County Judge Janice Cunningham followed on February 5, 2018, with a sentence of 40 to 125 years. The 2 state sentences run concurrently with each other, but both run consecutive to his federal sentence. A federal judge had already sentenced him to 60 years on December 7, 2017, for the child pornography charges. That federal sentence runs first. His state time does not begin until after it ends. Since federal inmates must serve at least 85% of their sentence before becoming eligible for any time off for good behavior, Nassar is not eligible for federal release until January 30, 2068, when he would be 104 years old. However, that time did not come easy for him. On July 9, 2023, Nassar was stabbed 10 times by a fellow inmate at USP Coleman II in Florida. He survived and was subsequently transferred to FCI Lewisburg, a medium-security federal prison in Pennsylvania, where he is currently being held. 5. Edwin Wren. On a Thursday afternoon in October of 2011, a 9-month-old baby girl was brought to Halifax Health Medical Center in Daytona Beach, bleeding heavily from severe physical trauma. The parents had left her at home in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, with a 19-year-old man named Edwin Wren, a roommate who sometimes watched the child while they ran errands. When deputies arrived at the residence, Wren was already gone. Volusia County Sheriff's investigators, New Smyrna Beach Police, and a sheriff's helicopter spread out across the neighborhood. Several hours later, following investigative leads, a deputy tracked Wren down inside a bathroom stall at a Walmart on State Road 44. He was shirtless. When detectives questioned him, he said he had stepped out to go to McDonald's and came back to find the baby bleeding. The story did not hold. He was arrested that same night on charges of sexual battery on a child under 12 and aggravated child abuse, both capital felonies in Florida, and held without bail. The baby was transported by ambulance to Halifax Health and underwent surgery to repair the injuries Wren had caused. At trial, Wren entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. He testified that a voice told him to hurt the child and that he blacked out and had no memory of what followed. He also disclosed that he had been sexually abused himself as a child. The jury rejected the insanity defense entirely. After deliberating for less than 30 minutes, they returned a guilty verdict on sexual battery of a child under 12, a capital felony under Florida law. Judge Leah Case sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole and formally designated him a sexual predator under the Florida Sexual Predators Act. A baby who could not call for help could not tell anyone what was happening. The next case involves a 9-year-old. 6. Granville Ritchie. On May 16, 2014, a 9-year-old girl named Felicia Williams left her Tampa home with a woman named Ebony Wiley, a family friend who called herself Felicia's godmother. Wiley had recently become involved with a man she had saved in her phone as my husband. His real name was Granville Ritchie, and she had met him in the spring of 2014, charmed by his Jamaican accent. He suggested they come to his mother's apartment in Temple Terrace that day. What happened after they arrived is what put him on Florida's death row. Once at the apartment, Wiley testified that Ritchie sent her out to buy marijuana. She tried to take Felicia with her, but Ritchie told her to leave the girl behind because Wiley had no driver's license and would have drugs in the car. Wiley left. When she came back, Felicia was gone. Ritchie told her the girl had walked to a nearby CVS to buy candy. There was no sign of her there. The following morning, Felicia's nude body was found floating against the rocks and mangroves off the Courtney Campbell Causeway in Tampa Bay. Prosecutors said Ritchie had sexually assaulted and strangled her, concealed her body in a suitcase, and driven it to the causeway that same night. Cell phone data placed him moving west through Tampa and across the causeway during the hours she went missing. Sand and leaves taken from his car matched the scene where her body was found. A critical piece of evidence at trial was a brief 911 call made from Ritchie's phone while Felicia was alone with him in the apartment. Prosecutors said the call was made by Felicia herself. Ritchie chose not to contest the guilt portion of his trial, and his appellate attorney later acknowledged the state's evidence was sufficient. Ritchie's trial concluded in September of 2019. A guilty verdict came 4 hours after closing arguments, on counts of first-degree murder, sexual battery, and aggravated child abuse. All 12 jurors unanimously recommended death. On September 11, 2020, Judge Michelle Cisco formally sentenced him to death. The Florida Supreme Court upheld the conviction and sentence in June of 2022. Ritchie never spoke throughout the entire proceedings. 7. Ariel Castro. Between August of 2002 and April of 2004, Ariel Castro abducted 3 young women off the streets of Cleveland, Ohio. The first was Michelle Knight, 21 years old, who disappeared on August 22, 2002, after Castro offered her a ride while she was trying to get to a custody hearing for her son. Amanda Berry vanished on April 21, 2003, the day before she was set to turn 17, after accepting a ride from Castro following a shift at the Burger King where she worked. Gina De Jesus was 14 years old when she went missing on April 2, 2004, while walking home from school. All 3 knew Castro, a school bus driver in the community with children of his own. That familiarity is what made them get in the car. Castro held all 3 women at his home at 2207 Seymour Avenue in Cleveland's Tremont neighborhood. He chained them, boarded up the windows, barricaded the doors, and subjected them to years of repeated sexual assault. Knight became pregnant 5 times during captivity, and each time Castro starved and beat her until she miscarried. Berry also became pregnant, and Knight was the one who delivered the baby on Christmas Day, 2006, breathing life into the newborn when she was not initially breathing. Berry's daughter, fathered by Castro, grew up inside that house. On May 6, 2013, Castro left the house. Berry also became pregnant, and Knight was the one who delivered the baby on Christmas Day, 2006, breathing life into the newborn when she was not initially breathing. Berry's daughter, fathered by Castro, grew up inside that house. On May 6, 2013, Castro left the house and failed to secure one of the interior doors. Berry noticed, worked her way to the front door, screamed through a screen, and a neighbor helped kick the door open. Berry escaped with her daughter, ran to a neighbor's house, and called 911. When police arrived, they found Knight and DeJesus still inside. He was indicted on 329 counts and pleaded guilty to 937 counts, including rape, kidnapping, and aggravated murder. The murder charges tied to his role in repeatedly ending Knight's pregnancies by force. Sentencing took place on August 1, 2013, before Cuyahoga County Judge Michael Russo. Knight addressed Castro directly in court, telling him she had spent 11 years in hell, that his hell was just beginning, and that while he would die a little every day in prison, she would live on. Castro called himself sick, not a monster, and claimed most of what happened was consensual. Judge Russo sentenced him to life in prison plus 1,000 years, with no possibility of parole. On September 3, 2013, roughly 1 month into his sentence, Castro was found hanging in his cell at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio. He had used his bedsheets. He was 53 years old. 8. John Geoghegan. John Geoghegan was ordained as a Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Boston on February 13, 1962. Over the next 30 years, he served at 6 parishes across the Boston area, and at every single one, complaints followed him. Church leadership, including Cardinal Bernard Law, received warnings about Geoghegan going back as far as the 1960s. The response was not to remove him from ministry. It was to reassign him to a different parish, where the pattern would repeat. Geoghegan targeted boys from struggling families, many from broken homes, whose parents were often grateful for the attention a priest showed their children. He befriended those families deliberately. Civil lawsuits that eventually followed would include claims from nearly 150 people who said Geoghegan had abused them across those parishes. One family alone alleged he had abused 7 of their children and nephews. Despite the volume of complaints and with church leadership fully informed, he continued moving from parish to parish for decades. He was removed from active ministry and defrocked in 1998. It took the Boston Globe's Spotlight team publishing its investigation in January of 2002 to bring the full picture into public view. What that investigation revealed shook not just the Boston Archdiocese, but the Catholic Church worldwide. Cardinal Law resigned in December of 2002 as a direct result. Geoghegan had already been on trial by then. He was convicted on February 21, 2002, of indecent assault and battery for grabbing the buttocks of a 10-year-old boy at a swimming pool at the Waltham Boys and Girls Club in 1991. Judge Constance Sweeney sentenced him to 9 to 10 years in state prison at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Shirley, Massachusetts. It was the only sentence he would ever receive. Dozens of additional criminal cases and civil suits remained active, but Geoghegan never made it to those proceedings. On August 23, 2003, fellow inmate Joseph Druce followed Geoghegan into his cell just after lunch. He had spent over a month planning the attack, including 2 hours stretching a sock into a ligature and pre-cut a book to jam the electronic cell door track so guards could not open it from outside. Once inside, Druce bound Geoghegan's hands behind his back with a t-shirt, gagged him, jumped on him repeatedly from the bed, and strangled him with the stretched sock. Geoghegan was pronounced dead at 1:17 in the afternoon at UMass Memorial Health Alliance in Leominster. He was 68 years old. Druce, already serving a life sentence for the 1988 murder of George Rollo, a bus driver from Gloucester, told investigators he had heard Geoghegan advising other inmates on how to abuse children and discussing plans to move to South America after release. Druce said he saw himself as the one chosen to stop it. He received a second life sentence without parole for the murder. 9. Richard Huckle. Richard Huckle grew up in Ashford, Kent, in a middle-class, church-going family. He presented himself abroad as a freelance photographer and Christian English teacher, and that cover was the entire strategy. Between March of 2006 and December of 2014, Huckle traveled through Malaysia, Cambodia, and India, gaining access to schools, orphanages, and impoverished communities by positioning himself as a helpful Westerner. He used that access to abuse children as young as 6 months old. What set this case apart was the scale of how he documented and circulated what he was doing. He photographed and filmed the abuse and shared the content on a dark web network called The Love Zone, which had approximately 9,000 members. He kept a personal scorecard he called PedoPoints, logging a claimed total of 191 children. He also wrote a 60-page manual called Pedophiles and Poverty, Child Lover Guide, which the sentencing judge described as a truly evil document he had planned to turn into a commercial enterprise, and he tried to crowdfund the release of his abuse material online. Investigators from Australia's Task Force Argos identified him through a distinctive freckle visible in footage and an unusual phrase he used consistently in dark web posts. They traced those details through social media until they had a name. He was arrested at Gatwick Airport on December 19, 2014, as he was returning home from Malaysia. He pleaded guilty to 71 offences at the Old Bailey in London. 23 victims could be confirmed through photographic evidence, though Judge Peter Rook said at sentencing that the real number was likely closer to 200. The victims ranged from 6 months to 12 years old. On June 6, 2016, Rook sentenced Huckle to 22 life sentences with a minimum term of 25 years before he could apply for parole. As Huckle was led out of the courtroom, someone in the public gallery called out that 1,000 deaths would not be enough for him. He was 30 years old at sentencing and served 3 years. On October 13, 2019, fellow inmate Paul Fitzgerald carried out an 80-minute attack inside Huckle's cell at Full Sutton Prison in Yorkshire. Fitzgerald bound Huckle's hands and feet, gagged him, strangled him with an electrical cable sheath, sexually assaulted him with a 4-inch kitchen implement, stabbed him in the neck with a weapon made from a screw inserted into a melted toothbrush, and forced a pen so deep through his nose that it penetrated the bone and entered his brain. Huckle was pronounced dead at 12:30 in the afternoon. He was 33 years old. When prison officers pulled Fitzgerald from the cell, he told them he thought he had killed Huckle. He later told a mental health manager at the prison that he had killed him in cold blood and wished he could have cooked parts of his body. He said he had planned to kill more inmates but was having too much fun. Fitzgerald was convicted of the murder on November 23, 2020, after the jury deliberated for 1 hour, and was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 34 years. Every single one of these men thought at some point that they were not going to get caught. Every single one of them was wrong. If you want more cases like these, the next video is right there.